Okay, I think we'll get started. Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Deena Ladd and I'm the Executive Director of the Workers' Action Center. I'm a member of the Campaign Against Anti-Black Racism, which is a network of students, labor activists, and community members in support of Lydia Dosu. The campaign has been active since 2020 and is the organizer of today's press conference. I will be your moderator today. We're recording this press conference, so you'll be able to forward this to folks that were not able to make it at this moment. If you're posting about the press conference on social media, I encourage you to use two hashtags, hashtag YorkU and hashtag CongressH. So that's CONGRESSH. This is not the first time our campaign has had to organize a press conference like this one, where an impressive array of speakers comes together to condemn the treatment of Black students, staff, and faculty at York University. It's almost like 2 years ago that I moderated a press conference in support of Professor Aimé Avalonto, who also spoke up against York University's attempt to fire him in retaliation for speaking out against anti-Black racism at Glendon College. 2 years later, we are here again, but this time for Lydia. Lydia has worked at York University for 24 years. In 2019, she filed a complaint at the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario about anti-Black racism and discrimination at Glendon College. Like Professor Avalonto, Lydia's complaints are unresolved. But that didn't stop York University from firing her on January the 31st of this year, 2023. In response, the speakers that you will hear from and see today are gathered to express our unconditional support for Lydia and to condemn these recent actions by York University administration. We're also here to put York University on notice. If you think that you can bury these cases and then promote yourselves as leaders in the fight against anti-Black racism, you are sadly mistaken. We are here to hold you accountable for your actions. In the coming weeks, we will be shining a spotlight on the multiple, numerous, and ongoing incidents of anti-Black racism that continue to harm Black students, staff, and faculty at York. And today's press conference is really just the beginning. We will now turn it over to our speakers today, who present a wide range of backgrounds and experiences, but who really are all here to support Lydia, who will actually be our first speaker. I'd like to welcome Lydia Dosu, who is going to be speaking now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for being here. My name is Lydia Dosu, and I have been an employee at York University for over 24 years. I have worked in multiple departments as an administrative secretary and have performed my work in French and English. Most recently, I have worked at Glendon College. On January 31st of this year, on January 31st sorry for my emotions. On January 31st of this year, the York University administration fired me from my job. They fired me on the first day I returned to work from a short-term sick leave. I felt deeply humiliated and I could barely think or move. When York fired me, they were going to ship me my belongings. Sorry. when you have fired me, they were going to ship my belongings to me the next day, the very next day, which was the first day of Black History Month. They no longer wanted me to step on campus. I had to arrange to get my items removed myself. After 24 years, I was told to get out immediately. It made me feel like a criminal, coming to campus under darkness and leaving without having the chance to say goodbye to friends and people I worked with for so many years. Over 2 months later, I still haven't said goodbye to them. In their termination letter to me, the York University described me as a health and safety risk because I have raised complaints about anti-Black racism at the workplace. They try to say that making complaints about anti-Black racism is a threat to my coworkers. But the real threat in the workplace is anti-Black racism. The real threat is the failure of the employer to protect me from my racist incidents or to protect me from retaliation for speaking out. This experience literally made me sick and deeply affected my mental health. When I first raised these complaints, I was scared, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Other Black people at Glendon were showing courage to speak out about what was happening to them. And I felt that I needed to speak out too. It wasn't the first time that I had experienced racism in the workplace at Glendon. It was happening every often, but I didn't know what it was. Like many other Black people in these situations, we just learn to live with it or let it slide. But this time, I wanted to do something about it. After a Black professor complained and insisted on an investigation, I decided to participate and share my story. But it wasn't long before problems began to emerge with the investigation. Instead of being able to share my experiences in a safe and supportive environment, I was treated like a suspect by the investigator, who made me feel like I was being interrogated whenever I had to meet him. He asked me if I had a sexual relationship with another Black complainant. I later learned that he did not ask the white people he interviewed these kinds of questions. He made a conclusion about me without reading at all my experience, without reading all my evidence. Sorry. It was painful and made me feel powerless. He even laughed at me when I tried to tell him what I was feeling and experiencing. Instead of listening to me, he was constantly dismissing my experiences. In some instances, he tried to tell me that white people couldn't be racist if they were in relationship with Black people. I raised these problems with the administration, but they never did anything about the situation. I was left alone. When I asked for help from the investigator, he will send me back to the administration When I go to the administration will not even reply to me. So I was in a limbo. In the end, I could no longer participate because of the terrible impacts on my mental health. In 2019, I tried to get some relief from the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, but my application remains unresolved 4 years later. I'm not a public person. I'm a very shy person, and I don't like to be in the spotlight. But now I have nothing left to lose. York has already fired me. I am speaking out today because Black people shouldn't face retaliation when they raise complaints about anti-Black racism. Instead, they should be protected and supported. That's all I've asked. That's all I've asked the administration. Please help me. Please protect me. And my voice wasn't heard. I was not counted. I was ignored all along. I am also speaking out today to demand my immediate reinstatement at York University. Black people are sick and tired of paying the price just because we speak out. We are the ones who have to put up with racism in the workplace. And then we are the ones who are forced out when we complain. Too many Black people are afraid to speak out because they're worried they will lose their jobs if they do. They see what is happening to me and to other Black employees at Glendon who have also spoken out. At the same time as York is getting rid of Black employees like me, it is trying to portray itself as a leader in the fight against anti-Black racism. It is trying to repair its reputation in time for the 2023 Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences, which is coming to York in May. But York can't have it both ways. It can't claim to be a leader in the fight against anti-Black racism at the same time as it treats Black employees like trash. I am grateful that all of you have come here today to hear my story. And I am grateful to all the York students, to my fellow staff members, to supportive faculty, and to the community members who are supporting my demand for reinstatement. This fight is not just about me. It's about the kind of environment that all Black people have to work in. And it's about what kind of place we would like York University to be. This is your chance, York University, to show that you practice what you preach. Do the right thing for me and for all Black people at York. We demand nothing less. Thank you, people. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. I know that was really, really hard, and the courage that you have shown throughout this, culminating in the firing this past January, is so horrific. So thank you for your courage and bravery in speaking out. I know this is so hard. Our next speaker is Ron Franklin. Ron is an employment and human rights lawyer at Franklin Law in Toronto and is the legal counsel for Lydia. Please welcome Ron.
Thank you, Deena. Thank you, Lydia. My name is Ron Franklin. 2 years and 3 days ago, I was in much the same position as you see me here today. At that time, I spoke about a professor named M.A. Avalanto, a Black man of African descent who worked at York University. I'm here today as counsel to Lydia Dosu, a Black woman of Ghanaian descent. Like Professor Avalanto, she too raised concerns about anti-Black discrimination at York University. Like Professor Avalanto, sadly like Professor Avalanto, she too has paid a price that no employee should have to bear. Every one of us knows of a Black employee who has suffered in silence at work. An employee who goes to work each day, puts their head down, and just hopes and prays that things will get better. As Lydia said, you live with it and you let it slide. I'm here today to celebrate Lydia's courage, her resilience, and her agency. Lydia is done with suffering in silence. She is done with asking for due process, fairness, and dignity. She is here today demanding what is rightfully hers, and I know all of us are here, could not be more happy to support her. Lydia has already told you that York University terminated her employment on January 31st, 2023. She has already told you how humiliating and degrading that experience has been for her. What I would like to do is briefly tell you how she got here and to give you my perspective as a human rights lawyer who's been practicing for close to 15 years about the similarities between what I see in her experience and the experience of other workers who allege that they've been subjected to anti-Black discrimination at work. Lydia began working at York University in 1998, and she successfully worked with a variety of co-workers and supervisors without issues for close to 15 years. Things began to change around 2014. That's when she was directed to work as a departmental secretary, and I'll focus on that term, that label, departmental secretary at York University's Glendon College. She was the only person who identified as Black on the administrative team. Her predecessor was a work-study student whose position was that of an FSL center assistant, an administrative assistant. That student did not identify as Black. When Lydia attempted to use the title of administrative assistant, her supervisor emailed her and directed her to use the title of departmental secretary. I'll pause here to point out that for many of you, this will seem insignificant, but there's been a lot of work and study about the difference between the implications of calling somebody a secretary and an assistant. A secretary's work is generally associated with clerical duties and is generally understood as having less responsibility, less independence, and less decision-making power than an administrative assistant. Lydia found that direction from her supervisor to be troubling. It did not come close to recognizing her experience, years of service, or the scope of duties and responsibilities that she performed. In late 2015, Lydia began reporting to a new supervisor. She was hopeful and optimistic that things would change. She will tell you that things did not get better, they got worse. She will tell you that the new supervisor rarely assigned her any meaningful work. Instead, she was typically assigned photocopying duties, while work that was previously done by her was assigned to her colleagues, none of whom were Black. In 2016 and 2017, Lydia was faced with a very difficult situation. It became apparent to her that a non-Black professor was getting preferential treatment over two Black professors in the context of courses that were being allocated to them. She did what any employee should do in that circumstances. She raised concerns with her supervisor. Lydia will tell you that from that point forward, her experience at work became one of being isolated, excluded, critiqued without justification, micromanaged, and subjected to excess scrutiny. Lydia will tell you that when she greeted her supervisors and colleagues, they would ignore her and not reply. She was told that she could not be trusted in front of her coworkers and was excluded from work-related communications. This experience was extremely humiliating and embarrassing for Lydia. I'll pause here to say that in my experience, anti-Black discrimination often manifests in this way. Though the aggressions may be subtle, they are no less harmful. Faced with working in such an environment, you typically see employees' health and well-being deteriorate. That is exactly what happened to Lydia, as she's told you. As her anxiety about being at work increased, she began to suffer panic attacks. As a means of coping, she would often work with her door closed, a decision that garnered further criticism and gossip amongst her colleagues and supervisor. In September of 2017, Lydia approached her union after many attempts to resolve the situation within her department. They were already aware that a Black professor named Professor Avalanto had demanded that York University initiate an investigation into his claims of anti-Black discrimination. It was suggested to her that she take her concerns and have them addressed through that process. For those of you who don't know, workplace investigations have become industry in Ontario. When done right, they provide an internal check and balance. No employee is guaranteed that their concerns will be substantiated, but no employee should have their dignity, self-esteem, and experience of discrimination exacerbated by the investigation process. When done wrong, workplace investigations often re-victimize those who complain about anti-Black discrimination and have a chilling effect on others who might otherwise come forward. Lydia will tell you that the investigation process had that exact effect on her. She will tell you that the internal investigation not only failed to stop the mistreatment that she was subjected to, but also exacerbated her experience of anti-Black discrimination. Lydia told you in great detail some of the more poignant things that the investigator is reported to have done. Asked Lydia about her sexual relationships with the only other Black professor at Glendon College. Told Lydia that her supervisor could not be racist because her partner identified as Black and her child was mixed race, not my words. The investigator reportedly disclosed that he used to be married to, again, not the way that I would phrase it, an Indian or colored woman, even though that fact had nothing to do and was irrelevant to her complaint. She will tell you that when the investigation, her concerns about the investigation went unaddressed, she was left with no choice but to stop participating in the investigation. It is noteworthy in that regard that Professor Avalanto and another senior professor at Glendon College refused to continue participating in the investigation, in large part because of the concerns about the integrity of the investigation and the lack of grasp that the investigator had about the ways in which anti-Black discrimination manifests at work. On April 23rd, 2019, Lydia filed an application at the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. I'll pause here to point out that the HRTO's importance in the human rights regime in Ontario cannot be overstated. In many instances, it provides the only arm's length and independent means through which employees can pursue redress. When an application is filed at the HRTO, it typically forces an employee to pause, self-reflect, and to give serious consideration to the concerns that an employee has raised. It is a time and an opportunity for both the employee and the employer to engage in a reckoning. and to engage in deep reflection. In our view, what happened to Lydia is exactly what one would expect to happen when the human rights system fails. Lydia will tell you that the HRTO has not positively impacted her attempts to secure redress for her human rights concerns. Nothing of significance has occurred since 2020. No evidence has been heard, no decisions have been made. She will tell you that the HRTO has not delivered on its promise. And I can tell you from my experience as counsel, many employees feel the same way. The promise that the HRTO holds is not a guarantee that she will win, that Lydia will win, or that an adjudicator will find that she was subject to discrimination. What Lydia expects and what she deserves is a process that is fair, timely, gives serious consideration to all parties' positions, and a process in which she gets a decision rendered by a qualified individual with an in-depth understanding of how anti-Black discrimination manifests at work. We all know that when Black employees complain about anti-Black discrimination, they are the ones who are removed from the workplace and isolated, while those who stand accused of discrimination continue in their careers relatively unscathed. Lydia will tell you that is exactly what happened to her. She was removed from her home department. The investigation continued unabated, notwithstanding her concerns. The investigator accused her of, among other things, posing a health and safety risk to others because she raised concerns about anti-Black discrimination, and she has now lost a job and the financial security that she has spent more than 20 years earning. I'll close by saying, in my experience, Lydia's experience is not unique, but not because it happens infrequently. Her experience is unique. It's unique because Lydia has the courage to speak truth to power at great personal expense and sacrifice. But it's an experience that was totally foreseeable. It speaks to what any employee can expect when Ontario's human rights system fails to deliver on its promise. It's important to note to anyone who's listening today that none of the allegations that you will hear about today have been proven in any legal venue. There are other narratives that deserve your consideration, and I suggest that everyone inform themselves as best they can. But today, our focus is on Lydia. Our focus is on the employee who pursued human rights redress in York University at the Human Rights Tribunal. And so we're centering her today. What we're demanding is that Lydia be reinstated by York University. And what we're demanding is that the HRTO fulfill its mandate. We wanted to assign Lydia's case to an individual with a strong legal background and a demonstrated understanding of how anti-Black discrimination manifests in the workplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ron, for that very, very clear overview and for your thoughtful insights. So our next speaker is Adeze Mbalaja, the president of the York Federation of Students. Adeze is the incoming national executive representative of the Canadian Federation of Students and its current Black Caucus representative. Welcome, Adeze.
Thank you, Deena, and thank you to those with whom I share this webinar with and those of you who are watching. Hello, everyone. My name is Adeze Mbalaja. My pronouns are she, her, and like said so wonderfully by Deena, I am the president of the York Federation of Students, the Central Undergraduate Students Union at York University. I think I'd like to begin by recognizing from a student perspective the wonderful ways in which this year has brought about much needed change for us. It's been a big year for students. We're back on campus. We're back to in-person learning. We're back to making the much needed connections surrounding academia and surrounding the university experience. We are also back as Black students to experiencing the consistent anti-Black racism pervasive to York University, to its campuses, to its institutions, to the very ways in which the institution governs itself. As highlighted by those who have spoken before me, Lydia's case is not unprecedented at York University, and that is a problem. The York Federation of Students has launched several actions and campaigns against anti-Black racism going as far back as 2018. We have been here before, and yet we remain in the same place due to a lack of action, a lack of accountability, and an inability of York University's administration to make a true and genuine commitment to addressing anti-Black racism at York University. Going as far back as 2018, when we saw a resurgence and an increase of police presence on campus, police presence and security presence that we know targets Black individuals, from students to staff to faculty to TAs to the entirety of the community that is so vibrant at York University. We know what those impacts look like, and we have seen this before. Fast forward to 2023, we are in the same boat, and an increase in the security presence that serves no purpose other than to intimidate, other than to stifle, and other than to silence Black students and Black members of the York University community. York University has a lot of change to do, from Professor Ime Avalanto's case, which still remains open, which still has seen no just resolution, which still has seen a lack of accountability on York University's end to recognize the ways in which they have failed Black individuals on our campus, to Lydia Dosu's case. A case of harm, a case of anti-Black racism, and a case that needs to change. These are two individuals who have had the courage to speak up, but there are many, countless students, faculty, and staff members who do not and are not given the same opportunity to speak up. It would be remiss of me not to highlight the fact that as I have mentioned before, we have seen a return to in-person activity, in-person campus life, but we have also seen a return to the York University administration prioritizing anti-Black racism in an attempt to stifle that campus life. As the York Federation of Students, we have seen from things like our concert, where the York University administration made it exceptionally clear that they were unwilling to host the concert due to safety concerns because of a Black artist. A concert that is free, a concert that is open to all members of the community, a concert that brings students together and introduces them to the vibrant community here at York University. The administration stopped that. That was rooted in anti-Black racism, the same anti-Black racism that allows for police presence on our campuses, that allows for the targeting of Black staff members and Black faculty, that allows for the ways in which anti-Black racism continues to manifest on our campuses. Continuing on the trend of campus life, we saw during Frosh Week the way cops and security were made a priority and were allowed to roam free on campus, cops and security that threatened the safety of Black students and racialized students. As mentioned, this is not the first time we have been here. Coming out of a town hall that occurred in 2020, where Rhonda Lenton, the president of York University, was present, Rhonda made a public commitment, a promise, to create a report on the amount of complaints of anti-Black racism that there have been at York University. We have seen no such report. We have seen no response. What we have seen is countless committees, countless working groups, countless task forces that amount to nothing, so that the university can continue to applaud itself on its half-baked attempts at being an institution that prioritizes human rights. It is not difficult to address anti-Black racism. It is not difficult to acknowledge the ways in which York University continues to fail. What it requires is accountability. What it requires is listening to Black members of the community, and York University has not done that. The demands have not changed from 2018. They have not changed from 2019. They have not changed from 2020. We demand the removal of cops and security on our campus. We demand a clear complaints process. We demand an actual address of anti-Black racism in the ways that it is systemic on our campuses and in our spaces. We continue to await the response of York University. This must end. Thank you.
And the commitment of students in this fight has just been right from the very beginning, and it's so great to have you as part of today's event. Thank you very much. for everything. Our next speaker will be Nati Zamisa, the president of the York University Graduate Students Association. Nati is a Master of Arts candidate in Social and Political Thought in Black Studies. Welcome, Nati.
Thank you, Deena. And hi, my name is Nati Zamisa. I'm the president of the York University Graduate Students Association. And I hate the fact that we need to do this again, and that I, like many of the presidents before me, need to talk about how York University fosters and deploys institutional anti-Black racism. York is currently misusing our graduate and undergraduate tuitions, and as a public institution, all of our taxpayer dollars to pay an investigator to dismiss Lydia Dosu's allegations of race-based harassment and discrimination. Because that investigator determined that the person who's experiencing this harassment and discrimination is a health and safety risk to the university. Not the perpetrators of harassment and discrimination, not the programs, departments, faculties, or colleges that allowed this harassment and discrimination to occur, but Lydia Dosu. And the York University's administration looked at that investigator's report and was like, yes, I agree with these findings. And by doing that, they allowed for an environment of impunity to fester and embolden its employees to perpetuate and deepen this institutional anti-Black racism. My fellow graduates know this all too well, but Lydia's experience really speaks to how the tools that York University offers to address anti-Black racism aren't just broken, they're actively being used to harm the people they're supposed to serve. Lydia's case highlights how at York, complaints of anti-Black racism are weaponized against the complainant by being misrepresented as a threat against the administration. For the second time in 2 years at Glendon College, York University admin is reminding us that anti-Black racism is the norm. Lydia's, MA's, Professor Carolyn Shanaz Hussein's, and countless others' experience prove that there are no protections from reprisals for people who report incidences of anti-Black racism. In fact, it proves that there are reprisals for anybody who dares to even try. It demonstrates that if you lay claims against the quote-unquote wrong people, that you risk losing your career. And Lydia's ongoing fight for justice is a testament to how fighting for social change in higher education institutions puts a target on your back. But what's scary is that this is the same institution that's championing a framework to address anti-Black racism and this Black Inclusion Action Plan. The same institution that signed onto the Scarborough Charter, a pledge to fight anti-Black racism in post-secondary institutions in Canada. This is the same institution that's not only complicit, but is currently the active perpetrator in anti-Black violence against Lydia Dosu and countless others. There are so many unnamed. Who could imagine that complaining about harassment and anti-Black racism and discrimination meant that the complainant would be the only one to face consequences? This has happened twice in the same college. And if this isn't a trend, it's clear this is a distinctly anti-Black victim blaming tactic. And this tactic for the York Center for Graduate Students has a real chilling effect. It means that every meeting that we have with a graduate student alleging that a York University employee is anti-Black or racist comes with more problems than solutions. And I have 2 of those meetings this week. It means that as a UXA staff, and for the UXA staff and execs that follow me, that I'm going to have to be real about how the complaints process actually plays out, because cases like Lydia set the precedent. And it turns what should be a meeting to point graduate students in the right direction into a discussion about the hidden consequences of making a complaint. And so cases like Lydia's, they're actively preventing students, staff, faculty, employees from making that complaint in the first place. And even when that complaint is made, Black people are still not out of the woods. Still today, almost 2 years after the fact, the UXA is seeking intervener status in 1 of 4 of Professor M.A. Avalanto's Human Rights Tribunal applications because of York University's invariably anti-Black treatment of a graduate student that was under his supervision. It's like a punishment that's justified by association. As York students and employees, we don't know to whom our complaints pose a health and safety risk. We don't know the quote-unquote wrong people to launch a complaint against, but we've long known that York University's complaints resolution process is broken. Since 2021, the UX has been advocating for an anonymous complaints reporting system for faculty, staff, and students because too many have been silenced and too many have been forced to leave. But right now, the UX is demanding that York University fully reinstate Lydia to a position commensurate with her qualifications and experience and in a safe working environment outside of Glendon. We're demanding that York compensate Lydia for income lost and for the pain and suffering she's endured and shared with us today through this process. We're demanding that York acknowledge and apologize for Lydia's experience of anti-Black racism and discrimination. And we're demanding that York address Lydia's and others' complaints about anti-Black racism in an open, transparent, and accountable way that really meaningfully engages with these documents that they're putting out in the Scarborough Charter that they've signed. And finally, we're calling on you, members of the York community and beyond, to stand in solidarity Lydia Dosu. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Was in terms of really just like clearly outlining the implications and the consequences of what happens to like the whole entire York University body when the York University doesn't tackle anti-Black racism. So thank you for your words. So our next speaker will be Marie Clark Walker. She's the former Secretary Treasurer and Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress, which is the largest labour body in Canada. Marie has been a lifelong fighter against anti-Black racism in the workplace and is a leading member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists of Canada. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you, Deena. And I am here today representing the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. First, let me express CBTU's and my personal very, very deep solidarity with Lydia and all those dealing with and who have dealt with anti-Black racism. I want you all to know that you are being heard and you are being seen. Maybe not by the masses out there or by your unions or the Human Rights Tribunal, but you are being heard and seen by members of the Coalition of Black Trade Unions and others out there that have experienced what you are going through and want to make sure that nobody else experiences this. So let me first begin by saying that CBTU was formed to ensure the inclusion of Black workers' voices in the world of work, and more specifically in their unions as well. In doing so, it is our task to challenge public policies that undermine workers' rights and perpetuate a culture of white supremacy, whether it's inside or outside of our unions. We promote access for Black workers and workers of color to fight against all forms of systemic racism. Therefore, challenging anti-Black racism wherever it raises its ugly head is important. So when the courts that are supposed to protect us and the policies that are supposed to protect us don't, we have a very serious problem. As many of you already know, for nearly 20 years, unionized employees in Ontario have enjoyed the right to choose how they raise a complaint when faced with human rights violations in the world of work. They can file a grievance through their collective agreement or file an application with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, and in some cases, do both. Over time, the Human Rights Tribunal has developed specialized expertise in these cases involving anti-Black racism, not because they wanted to, but because they were forced to in a lot of the situations because of the result of the work of Coalition of Black Trade Unions and others that were involved in the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists over the years. For people like Bromley Armstrong, June Veacock, Janice Geary, Beverly Johnson, and I could go on. In October of 2021, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that effectively ended the right of the majority of unionized workers in Manitoba to bring forth complaints to the Human Rights Commission. This decision and the experience of Black workers forced CBTU to worry that Ontario would go the same route. The Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario launched a process to consider whether unionized employees in Ontario should continue to have access to the tribunal. Worrisome, very worrisome because of the Manitoba experience. Therefore, the Coalition of Black Trade Unions applied for intervenor status in order to give voice to the experiences of Black unionized employees in Ontario. In doing so, we've recognized that the Ford government has failed, horribly failed, to strengthen the Human Rights Code and instead are relying on the courts to interpret the code. And we all know what happens when it goes forward in that direction. Hence the importance for the Coalition of Black Trade Unions and others to ensure that Black unionized workers continue to have the right to file human rights complaints to the Human Rights Tribunal when facing anti-Black racism in the workplace. And it is very clear, based on everything that you've heard today, the situation that Lydia is going through is definitely linked to anti-Black racism. York University seems to be getting seems to be not going in the wrong direction when it comes to dealing with anti-Black racism. The complaints that are being put forward by other organizations as well just tells us that things are not going the way that they need to be going, especially when you want a community, a world that deals with justice in a fair manner. Cases that are at the Human Rights Commission are taking way too long or are being dismissed without an understanding of the problem. The solution is not to remove access to justice, but to strengthen it. Strengthen it by properly resourcing the Human Rights Tribunal, by properly resourcing unions and making sure that unions also have the specialized requirements and the people that are knowledgeable to deal with these particular situations. For years, we have been asking for particular proper training, not a 3-hour training, but training of stewards, of leadership, so that they understand what anti-Black racism looks like, and rather than pushing it to the side, actually do things to make sure that it does not happen. I know this is extremely painful for Lydia and for those who go through it. While Lydia was telling her story, I found myself being very emotional, because this is the story of dozens, if not hundreds, of Black workers across this country. For 19 years, I listened to these stories, and most of the time, workers didn't want to do anything about it. Not because they didn't want a solution, but because they were afraid of exactly what is happening to Lydia, afraid of the reprisals. We can't allow ourselves to sit back and let this happen. We have to raise our voices. We have to make sure that no one experiences things like this. This is not just a loss of a job for Lydia. This is loss of livelihood. And when this happens to folks with families, with children, how does one expect them? How does York University and other institutions like York University expect people to take care of themselves and contribute to the type of society that we want? So this was a no-brainer for the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists to get involved in this case. I'm asking all those who are listening in right now, whether you belong to a union or not, to speak up, to be there, to support Lydia and others like her. Black workers, we matter. And we need to make sure that this unjust termination does not continue, does not stick. We need to reverse it and ensure that this does not happen to anyone ever again. And as Ron and Lydia said at the very beginning, this is not an ask. This is a demand. This is a demand. People deserve the respect. Lydia deserves the respect after 24 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. It's so important to have labor leaders like yourself standing in solidarity side by side with us in this campaign, and bringing all of your strength and support. Thank you. Our final speaker will be Dr. Laura May Lindo, the ONDP Member of Provincial Parliament for Kitchener Centre, the inaugural chair of the ONDP Black Caucus, and the official opposition critic for anti-racism and equity. Laura May has also served as the official opposition critic for colleges and universities and introduced Bill 67, the Racial Equity in Education Systems Act. Really thrilled to have you here with us, Laura May. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to begin also by sending some extra love to Lydia. The courage that it takes to stand up to a system that has already begun very overt instances of reprisal is, there are no words for that. And so I send you so much love from my home in Kitchener. And so here I am tuning into this press conference from my home in downtown Kitchener. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. Before I was elected, I was the Director of Diversity and Equity at Wilfrid Laurier University, where I worked rather closely with the Senior Advisor for Indigenous Initiatives. And she taught me that our land acknowledgements should be active, that recognizing the land you're on is the easy part. You can Google that, you can put an app on your phone for that. But the action part, and the reason there is a push for beginning conversations with a land acknowledgement, is because it's an opportunity for us to make a concrete connection between the topic of conversation you're about to have and the fact that you're having said conversation on stolen land. And so to come here in complete and utter support of Lydia, during such a time where we are seeing patterns of anti-Black racism from university to university. We are watching Indigenous colleagues that are hired under success hires, for instance, leave one institution to try again to do their amazing work at another institution, only to experience anti-Indigenous racism on campuses, is my starting point in connecting the dots within this sector. Just yesterday, I was actually watching a documentary on NFB called Honor to Senator Murray Sinclair. And it's Senator Sinclair's acceptance speech for the WFM Canada World Peace Award. And at the end of his speech, he said, he asked everybody to use their voice. And in fact, he suggests that they read the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. Just pick one, just focus in on one. And he said, and I quote, "Do what you can to make it happen." And so I am asking a very similar request to the 100 participants that are here and the hundreds of people that will watch this as it is held in our virtual digital spaces, to do the same thing, to demonstrate with action that you believe in the cause. And the cause is to ensure that our universities and colleges, that post-secondary education is free of examples of anti-Black racism. And not just the overt examples, but also the more subtle examples that are generally the precursor to the more overt examples of anti-Black racism that we see on university campuses. I stand with Lydia because in her case, her experience is not singular. In the work that I have done both before and after I was elected, example after example after example of anti-Black racism have been raised, and they look very much the same. The idea that we cannot see it or we don't know what it looks like is one that we hold on to because we are not courageous enough to change systems. Anti-Black racism looks like telling an employee to use a lesser title when they have a multitude of experiences that should have a different title. Anti-Black racism looks like telling that employee that their courage to express what anti-Black racism looks like in their own experience is a health and safety risk in the institution. Anti-Black racism looks like pushing faculty and staff out of the post-secondary system when they raise concerns in an attempt to make that system more caring, loving, empathetic to Black students, staff, and faculty. And anti-Black racism looks like the promotion of initiatives that on the surface appear to be doing something to change the culture, at the same time as you defensively refuse to hold yourselves accountable when examples of anti-Black racism are brought to your decision-making table. I stand with Lydia for her courage, and I stand with Lydia and also with Professor Avalanto and with all of the other nameless Black faculty, staff, and students who are not in a position to speak out about their experiences. We see you, we hear you, and we hold you as we hold Lydia. In my own world, I've used my own sphere of influence, which is at the provincial level, to try and provide the institutions like York University with the tools that would allow them to actually make the change that we are asking for. Bill 67 was tabled in 2022, the Racial Equity in the Education Systems Act. Though it made it to committee, the government refused to call it in committee, which is a process that most people don't even know about. And as a consequence, it died when the election was called. I've retabled the bill as Bill 16. It's the exact same name, Racial Equity in the Education Systems Act 2022. And I hope to be able to debate said bill and move it along. But whether or not I debate the bill, the hundreds of participants that are here watching that support Lydia can write to their members of provincial parliament and demand that they make that law. Because within that bill is a call for investments to ensure that we can, in fact, hire the right people to be able to support Black faculty, staff, and students, that we can make sure that people that are in decision-making spaces have the tools that they need to hold themselves accountable and to ensure that the environment in which we are advocating to have more Black students, faculty, and staff do their work is one that treats them with the love and care that they so deserve. I've also written to President Lenton. I had done so along with some of my colleagues that were members of the Black Caucus, and I offered a constructive way to move York University into a space where they were aligned with the Human Rights Code. And while I did receive a response back, which listed some initiatives that were being done at York University in the hopes of supporting Black students, faculty, and staff, the request that I made to provide that support so we can do things that are more meaningful was not taken up. My hope is that with the pressure of the masses supporting Lydia, that we can do better and that we will finally have York University admit to the patterns of anti-Black racism that we have heard today. Thank you so very much.
Government level and trying to combat anti-Black racism on our campuses, in our education system, and in our workplaces. So this ends the first part of the press conference, and now we'll take questions from the media and participants. So if you'd like to speak, please indicate by writing your question in the message box or by raising your hand. James, who is providing tech support today, will call on you when it's your turn and unmute you before you speak. And so just before we take our first speaker, I'm going to announce two important websites that are launching today. The first is an online petition demanding justice for Lydia, including her immediate reinstatement to the department at York University, where she will be free from retaliation and where she can work in a safe and healthy environment. The petition is directed at the York University Board of Governors. We encourage you to sign it, share the petition right away, and that petition is being posted right now in the chat room, in the message box. The second is an online fundraiser in support of Lydia while we're fighting this campaign. So Lydia is currently without income, and so our campaign is committed to raising the funds to support her and her family while we continue this fight for her reinstatement. We encourage you to donate whatever you can to the fundraiser. No amount is too big and no amount is too small, and to share it in your networks. We need to send a strong message to the York administration that we will stand with Lydia and help her get through this fight. And so that fundraising link is also being posted in the chat room as well. So let's open it up to the discussion to questions. I'm going to pass it over to James. James, do you want to let me know who the first speaker is?
Thanks, Deena. So I have just a couple of anonymous questions. The first one is, will the recording be posted? The participant missed the introduction at the beginning. So do you want to answer that one, Deena?
Yeah, so this session is absolutely being recorded and it will be posted and sent out. If we would really like you to forward this to folks who could not be here today, and to make sure that you're spreading this wide and far. So please, the link to getting involved in the campaign, signing the petition, like this recording will be sent out to everyone.
Thanks, Deena. And then I also have a request from another anonymous attendee who is asking all the panelists if they could provide an email where they may be contacted. And I think that might also be useful if you're available to speak to media afterwards. If there is an email address that you could provide in the chat, I'll leave that to you to decide. And if you want to contact our campaign directly, you can write to againstanti-black-racism@gmail.com. I'll drop that in the chat in a moment. And we might also be able to coordinate contacts for that central email address. I have a question for Ron and Laura May about the limits at the HRTO. And the question is why there are so many delays. And if Lydia's application was filed in 2019, it's 4 years later, why has there been no movement on this case when it was filed so many years ago?
That's an excellent question. So should we first forward it to Ron and then to Laura May?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why. There's a group called Tribunal Watch Ontario who's done a lot of work on this area. And they've commented on, I guess, the transformation of the tribunal into what we see today. Prior to 2008, there was a backlog. We had a system where complaints went through the commission, and then they went to the Human Rights Tribunal. After 2008, we had a direct access model where complaints went directly to the Human Rights Tribunal, and things were going well. Cases were being heard. And I'm not sure if it follows the change in government, but I do know that what we saw was that a number of adjudicators that were very experienced were not getting their appointments renewed. We also know that a lot of the appointments were shorter in nature. And so when you're an adjudicator looking to find employment, you're looking for a long-term contract. And the shorter the contract is, the less incentive there is to take these positions. It also speaks to independence. I also think, honestly speaking, there have probably been a lot more complaints going to the tribunal. There have been obviously events in the media where discrimination, anti-Black discrimination, has really been centered and focused on. And I think in addition to employment-related cases, we're seeing a lot of, the Human Rights Tribunal is seeing a lot of other cases. I'm not sure if it's a resource issue in terms of money. I think it's a political will issue. And I think it's just in my view, my personal view, I think it's about the importance that our society places on human rights. We pay a lot of lip service to this stuff, but in practice, we don't put our money. We don't put the money, the resources, the structure behind it for this system to be a very powerful and potent resource for applicants. And so I think there's a lot of systemic factors. I'm kind of rambling on, so I'll pass it over to Laura May. Laura May.
Thank you. I don't think that was a ramble at all. I agree fully and wholeheartedly that this is a political will issue that is now resulting in an underfunding issue. And what I have seen is that in 2018, with the change of government, the only route that the public had to challenge the government, because they had stopped, for instance, traveling bills into communities so that they couldn't receive any feedback, kind of similar to the experiences that we're speaking about here within the post-secondary sector and at York University. The result was that a lot of people were trying to use the social tribunals and the Ontario Human Rights Commission as an opportunity to have their concerns heard. What then transpired was that those tribunals were underfunded, some collapsed, And there was a change in the appointments, which, again, to your point, means that there are folks that are more aligned with the current government that are now appointed into these tribunals. One example, a concrete example of this that happened during the last session, was that an active police officer was brought in on a part-time basis into the Human Rights Tribunal at the exact same time that the Toronto Police Services had a human rights case against them going through said tribunal. I, in fact, raised that with the Integrity Commissioner so that we could make sure that there were eyes on what was happening. And within the system, there were limited remedies to actually address this. And a lot of those remedies rely on the person themselves recusing themselves from particular hearings, which I don't think is sufficient. I think if we want to have an independent human rights tribunal, then we've got to make sure that we have the right people with the right knowledge sitting on those tribunals. The last thing that I'll say is that we do know from the human rights side, and Ron, please correct me if I'm incorrect, but I was told that a large number of the cases that go to the tribunal are around racism, that they often don't resolve well. And I say that knowing that the Human Rights Tribunal and the Human Rights Commission are aimed to be educational, to change the culture and climate so that our world is more equitable. But what I'm also now seeing is that a lot of the people that are appointed do not have knowledge of what anti-Black racism looks like in any sector, but they are the ones that would then be hearing cases. So I do think that there are things that we can do to advocate, and a lot of that advocacy relies on the public demanding better from the government, who actually funds and supports these tribunals, or without the political will chooses not to.
Agreed.
Thing? No. Okay. James, back to you for questions.
Right, so we have one question coming from Professor Ricardo Grinspan, who is noting that York University is hosting the Congress in 2023, the Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences, a major national event where York is presenting itself as a leader on equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and specifically on anti-Black racism. Professor Grinspan asks, could the speakers comment on how they see York's claim to leadership at Congress in light of recent developments?
I was wondering if one of the student leaders want to speak to this.
Yeah, gladly. I'll maybe speak to it a little bit.
Great. Natty?
Yes, thank you, Deena. It's I think important to remember that York University uses even the framework that it has, the framework to address anti-Black racism, the Black Inclusion Action Plan, these real marketing tools in order to, bring in students from these communities. And I think that, again, they do this without any real or meaningful engagement with the actual problems that there are on campus. For example, these are frameworks, and they've actually removed policies that there used to be. We used to have a racism policy at York University, was drafted in 1994. It's no longer a secretariat policy. It's currently under revision with, the establishment of these new frameworks. So they're very front-facing, we're a really great campus, sets of documents, and they're using Congress to do the exact same thing, right? To present themselves as a leader in EDI. They developed all of these different frameworks and strategies around EDI. The question of implementation and how they actually work, is still in the air. But that's what I would say why they do it, and at least that's the perspective of the Graduate Students Association. So.
I think it would be fair to say that the undergraduate students share a very similar perspective. along the lines of what Nathy had said, York is exceptionally good at PR, and York is exceptionally good at positioning itself as a leader in conversations like these, while doing very little to address the material conditions for Black folks on our campuses. And so when things like Congress are being hosted, when things like the framework are being celebrated and the charter is being signed, it is exceptionally easy for York University to evade accountability and to avoid addressing the various ways that anti-Black racism remains baked into our institution.
Thank you, Adeze. James, any further questions?
So I think we are at the end of the question and answer period. Just a thank you to everybody who posted questions in the Q&A box and in the chat, and I'll hand it back to you, Deena, to conclude the press conference.
Sure. I mean, I think just even the presence of so many people today shows how much support Lydia has, and how much support the campaign against anti-Black racism at York University and other institutions has. People are standing up. People are saying enough is enough. This is not something that can continue. The toll that this is taking on students, on faculty, on staff, on the communities where people are from is just too immense. We had over 100 people attend this webinar, even though we only announced the press conference on the weekend. We really urge those of you who are watching to be part of this campaign and to speak up, and stand in solidarity with Lydia. Please sign and share the petition in support of Lydia's demands and donate to the fundraiser. Both the links are available on our website, and all of those links are being posted in the chat function right now. I wanted to give a big thanks and just a big thank you to all the speakers for your amazing, unwavering support for Lydia. And most of all, want to thank Lydia Dosu for taking such a brave stand against anti-Black racism at York University. This is such a hard thing to do, but you have all of our support, and we will make sure that you receive the justice that you deserve. As I said in my introduction, this is just the beginning. Please stay tuned for our next event, including a list of actions and meetings that we will be hosting during the 2023 Congress at York University, so that everyone knows what is going on at York University. If for more information about the campaign and to get more involved, you can email us at this address, againstantiblackracism@gmail.com. And just want to thank Lydia, our speakers, for everyone who attended, for all of your work and support. And we will get justice for Lydia, and that's what we're here to do. And we will do that not just for Lydia, but for Dr. Ame Avalonto and all the many other amazing people who have stood up against such bad treatment at York University. Thank you very much, and goodbye.